welcome to our sleep panel at this World Innovation Forum. My name is Videnovic. I'm a neurologist, chief of the Division of Sleep Neurology at Mass General Brigham and a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. And I have today this privilege of moderating this panel. I'm joined by my dear colleagues, world experts in the field of sleep medicine, Drs. Chuck Czeisler, Kieran Maskey, Larry Miller, and Andrew Wellman. And I would like to thank you all for taking time to join us today at this panel and share your thoughts on exciting theme of sleep and sleep health. Speaking about it, sleep has finally been recognized as a major pillar of health along physical activity, healthy nutrition, and mental well-being. Adequate sleep supports every organ system in the body, and sleep deprivation, on the other hand, carries many negative consequences both for health and diseases as they develop and start to burden our population. Framing sleep as a major pillar of health highlights its fundamental role in resilience, longevity, productivity, making it really as a core target for the public health strategies. And this is what today's panel is going to be about. We all thank you very much for choosing to join this session and engage in the conversation about sleep, innovation, and health. And all of us are certainly very appreciative of the organizers of this year's forum for their recognition of this topic as an important topic to dedicate a specific session at this World's Innovation Forum. So this is our brief introduction. We have prepared several themes along the concepts of sleep and circadian medicine. So we can get started. Let's get started. As I find myself, and we all find ourselves in various companies and talk about sleep medicine, conversation very quickly turns toward sleep apnea and sleep disorder breathing. And so this is going to be our first theme for today for this sleep panel, and we're going to talk about sleep disordered breathing and sleep apnea. And I'll start, Dr. Czeisler, let me start with you. I have a really important question, and I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves as they start with their reflections, so that's how we're going to make most of our time. So, Dr. Czeisler, perhaps you can share with us your research observations and findings about how common is sleep apnea in general population, and also touch upon how common is that patients are really not treated appropriately and not maybe even diagnosed with this really significant disorder.
Well, thanks very much, Alex. I too want to thank the organizers for having invited us here today. My name is Chuck Czeisler, and I'm the chief of the Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and the Frank Baldino Professor of Sleep Medicine and Director of the Division of Sleep Medicine at the Harvard Medical School. And a number of years ago, working in the area of shift work and so on, I was working with, we had a large project with the police around the country, and we were surveying them for the presence of various sleep disorders. Now, we were set up, all the textbooks at the time indicated that 4% of men and 2% of women had sleep apnea. And so we began screening police officers around the country for sleep apnea, expecting that the numbers would be somewhere in that range. What we found instead was that 1/3 of police officers screened positive for sleep apnea. And so I consulted, we had a number of sleep apnea specialists on the team, and it turned out that the definition of sleep apnea, when those numbers, 2% and 4%, were first raised, required the individual to primarily have a complaint of excessive sleepiness because it was a sleep disorder. And unfortunately, most patients with sleep apnea, particularly if it's severe, because of the activation of the cardiovascular system, it is the leading known cause of hypertension. They don't necessarily complain of sleepiness. So all those patients, despite the fact that they were at double the risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and so on, were not considered to have sleep apnea syndrome, even though they had sleep apnea. And so since that time, it's been recognized that 1 out of 3 men and 1 out of 6 women actually have sleep apnea. So and I asked a former president of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, why hasn't anybody said anything about this? And they said, we were so excited when the New England Journal of Medicine published the first paper saying it was 4%. We didn't think that anyone would believe a higher number, even though we knew that it was an order of magnitude higher at the time. And so we just went with it, which is kind of a crazy thing. And as a result, those patients were not eligible for treatment. And when they were followed for nearly 20 years, it was shown that those who weren't treated, it was kind of like the Tuskegee medical experiment for sleep apnea, that only 56% of them were alive after 18 years when they started at average age of 48, instead of the 94% without sleep apnea. So it's a lethal condition not to treat. But unfortunately, our data showed that 85% of the people were undiagnosed and untreated, even though they had full health care coverage. And many of them, if we talked to them, they said, well, we don't really want that treatment because, we don't want to wear a mask, we don't want to get CPAP, and so therefore we don't even if we suspect we have it, we don't even bother to go get diagnosed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that first-hand research experience and introducing already a controversy about how do we consider sleep disorder breathing clinically and how we approach our patients. This is a probably nice segue for one question I'd like to ask Dr. Wellman. If you would please comment on effects of sleep disorder breathing untreated on health, and what are really these existing treatments that Dr. Czeisler has just related to that currently exist in the management of sleep apnea, and then we'll move towards some innovation and what's ahead of us that we are looking forward to.
Sure. So sleep apnea my name is Andrew Wellman. I'm a research scientist and clinician at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. So basically, sleep apnea causes health problems as well as daytime sleepiness. The main health problems are cardiovascular disease, increased risk of heart attack, stroke, as well as increased mortality. Probably the most debilitating thing, or the things that brings patients into our clinic, are the fact that they are sleepy during the daytime when they're trying to perform a work or operate machinery or driving a car. And the main issue, though, is once we diagnose all these people with sleep apnea is when we say the treatment is using CPAP. And I don't know if any of you have tried CPAP, or if you know what that is. It's a mask that goes over your nose. Sometimes it goes over the mouth as well. You have to strap it down tightly. It blows air in. It's very effective at keeping the airway open, but 50% of our patients can't use it. And so this has been known. As soon as I came on the scene 20-some years ago, this was an issue, CPAP compliance, and my research focuses on alternative treatments outside of CPAP, and that's been the major focus of innovation in this area of sleep medicine, sleep apnea, which is trying to find newer and better treatments, because a vast majority of patients with sleep apnea go untreated and are susceptible to these health consequences.
Well, you Well, I think we'll all agree that we are very happy that we have CPAP as a treatment modality to offer to our patients. But you mentioned something that's, and it's really exciting, so we'd like you to share with us these new emerging treatments for sleep apnea. And perhaps since you talked about all these mechanical barriers and this device and masks and intolerance, etc., perhaps you can touch upon as well on the concept of pharmacological therapy of sleep apnea. And can the medication treatment really be considered, be effective? And you're on the forefront of that research, so we'd like to learn more from you about that.
Yeah, well, sure, thank you. It occurred to me that sleep apnea, and this isn't just me, but to many others, sleep apnea only occurs when you're asleep. You could be very heavy, overweight. You can lay down flat, relax, calm, and your airway doesn't close until you actually go to sleep. And so the way the brain goes to sleep is there's removal of excitatory chemicals, norepinephrine, histamine, serotonin. And when all these chemicals go away and the body goes to sleep, then the muscles in the throat relax, the tongue falls into the back of the throat and causes sleep apnea. And that's the inciting event. And there was research to show that if you could replace some of these chemicals in the correct area of the brain, then you could prevent the muscle relaxation leading to sleep apnea. And there was a lot of animal research at the time. No industry was investing in small molecule research or anything to try to target the receptor, despite the fact that it seemed to me, it was that aha moment, like Chuck said, where he found out the prevalence of sleep apnea was much higher. I was like, well, if there's no fundamental reason why it shouldn't be pharmacologically solvable. Yet all the treatments for sleep apnea are mechanical with CPAP, surgery, or you wear this dental appliance that pulls the jaw forward. But again, those are the compliance on those is low. And so, I was doing my regular research, but the high risk, high priority, high reward research that I was doing was just, and I'm not a pharmacologist, and I could just repurpose existing drugs, but I knew there were certain drugs that had these properties, and we were just going through many different drugs, losing all sorts of money, and this is NIH funding that is difficult to. So basically, I sort of given up almost until one of the last couple of drugs that we tested showed robust activation of the muscles in the throat and preventing about 50 to 60% of sleep apnea events. And so once we discovered this, I went to a friend of a friend who's now sitting next to me, and I made him sign a non-disclosure agreement, and he said, give me 2 weeks. And he raised enough money to start a company that has now finished 2 phase 3 studies with these drugs, showing a 50% improvement in sleep apnea. So the holy grail of getting a drug therapy seems like it could happen, but I just want to say this, is that, again, these are drugs that were repurposed, and in all likelihood, I hope it would spur more investment by big pharma to study these, more specific drugs that can target the upper airway muscles, maybe with fewer side effects, and that this would just be a beginning.
Terrific. Well, really warm congratulations on these successes and for really moving the field in a truly revolutionary way. So this is terrific. And we are also fortunate to have here Dr. Larry Miller with us. And we've heard, Dr. Miller, you're so effective in this fundraising, and that goes with all of the other intellectual property that moved this field forward. My question for you is, why do you feel that pharmaceutical industry is somewhat reluctant in advancing these therapeutics and this avenue of the research where the main focus is obstructive sleep apnea? And perhaps as a corollary to that question, what are really the barriers that we can identify to try to improve this interface and priority for our biopharmaceutical partners?
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm Larry Miller. I'm the CEO at ApneaMed. First of all, I want to thank Andrew. I owe everything to him, or just about. The insight that he had on this particular drug combination is extraordinary. In fact, when Andrew asked me to guess what the drugs were that he used, I couldn't come up with it. It really was an extraordinary insight. And I also want to mention Andrew's colleague, Luigi Taranto, who was working with him at the time and is now our Chief Scientific Officer at ApneaMed. So back to your question. Why does nobody care up to this time? And I can't give you a clear answer, but I can tell you a little bit. We've talked to a lot of the large pharmaceuticals, and one of them was fairly revealing, who said, the problem with this indication is there's a lot of white space around it. There's nobody's thinking about it, nobody's working in it. And, pharmaceuticals, especially the large pharmaceuticals, generally don't like that. They don't want a new technology, but they prefer a familiar indication. And, we were, even a few years ago, we were really the only company developing a pharmacologic for obstructive sleep apnea. Perhaps I'm priding myself too much, but as we become more and more successful, a number of other companies have sprung up, all earlier than we are, to work on this area. And I suspect if and when, I hope not long, our drug is approved, there will be many more. Because it's a huge indication, as Chuck's pointed out, total between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 adults in the US. So the opportunity is extraordinary. But in some ways, the pharmaceutical sphere doesn't like to be the first. They're quite happy to be the second. So I hope we'll see more and more. Because the obstacles they're not severe. We know how to test for this condition. There are a number of pharmaceuticals that may well be active. We actually, beyond our lead program, we brought in a second one from Europe just a few months ago that we think is almost equally attractive, that has a completely different mechanism of action. So there are a few working on it, but they're not many.
And Dr. Miller, what do we do with the central sleep apnea, right? When we talk about sleep apnea, such an impetus is on obstruction as the mechanism and that phenotype. What are your thoughts about combating these other phenotypes of sleep disorder breathing, such as central sleep apnea?
Again, and this may be familiar to some of you, may not be. The vast majority of patients who have sleep apnea have the obstructive component. That, as Andrew mentioned, the muscles in the back of the throat collapse backward and block the airway. But 5%, some people believe a little bit more, have a central component related to control of breathing in the brain. And this can be due to strokes, it can be due to brain tumors, other organic diseases in the brain. But it's also not uncommon in some other diseases, especially in cardiovascular disease. For example, a substantial percentage of patients with congestive heart failure have sleep apnea, but more commonly of the central kind. And that's really even more of a frontier than what we're working on with obstructive. We do have a phase 2 trial running now in those patients. From what we know, it's probably the only one. So for us, it's a natural extension of what we've done in obstructive sleep apnea, but it's very new.
Thank you so much. Well, obviously, there is a lot of innovation happening at MGB when it comes to advancing therapeutics of sleep disorder breathing. And I'd like now to shift to the second theme that we have developed for this panel today. And the theme is relevant to the health in the younger populations, sleep health in children and adolescents. That has a really huge public health impact. And Dr. Maskey, I'd like to ask you a few questions relevant to this domain of sleep and circadian health. Would you please comment on the role of sleep in preventing risky behaviors among adolescents, and perhaps also touch upon on school times as a interplay with the sleep and how that can affect, well, not only children, but their parents as well and grandparents. So I think very, very timely, important, and intervention-prone topics in our field.
So my name's Karen Maskey. I'm a child neurologist and sleep physician and clinical sleep researcher at Boston Children's Hospital. And yes, I think, starting off with, we really have an epidemic of sleep deprivation, especially that affect youth. There's certainly some regional findings to that, but it's estimated that 20 to 50% of kids are not getting the amount of sleep that is required for optimal health. And that certainly has some influence on risky behaviors and, sort of outcomes related to car accidents, pedestrian safety, and even poor decision-making when it comes to alcohol, drug use, and pregnancy. Some of that is biologic, so children's frontal lobes, your executive areas of the brain are not fully developed. If you have children, you probably experience this. And so sleep deprivation really impacts those frontal lobe and the decision-making areas. And interestingly, it's been studied well in adults that what happens with sleep deprivation, there's almost a disconnect between the frontal lobes and the amygdala, your emotional center. So there's sort of this biologic system where the brakes aren't on, but the emotional center is going. So you could imagine aggressive behavior as well as risky behavior kind of emerging in that type of context. So things like later school times, I think, have been really helpful for addressing some of these issues, because biologically, adolescents have a delayed circadian phase. After puberty, there's a shift in the time melatonin starts to rise, and adolescents start to become sleepy. And so what was happening is, because adolescents were the first people to go to school in the morning, wake times were anywhere from 5:30 to 7:30 for 8 o'clock or even earlier start times of schools. And so if an adolescent isn't able to fall asleep until midnight or 1 o'clock, their sleep duration is being curtailed, and that sort of becomes this additive sleep deprivation situation. Couple that with screen usage, which has increased, and the number of activities and other things that are going on in adolescents' lives. It used to be that there might be catch-up sleep on the weekends, but even that has gone down over time. And so school start times and public policy regarding that has really been a big development, at least in Western countries. In the US and European countries that have adopted a later school start time for adolescents, it's allowing them to get somewhere about half an hour more sleep, which doesn't sound like a lot, but half an hour actually is about what's used as a metric for improving some decision-making behaviors. It is interesting, Alex and I just came back from a World Sleep Congress in Singapore, and they have this issue of delayed start times isn't a universal improvement. So in Asian countries, for instance, over time, they have found that although the timing of sleep has initially increased, it's sort of, kids tend to just go to bed later and later. And so the sleep deprivation becomes like a chronic issue. And how to address that is probably with better education.
Kieran, not to minimize the problem with kids, but my wife and I had our 1-year-old and 3-year-old grandchildren last night. So we're very familiar with sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So Kieran, how do you think that from the practical perspective, we can implement these really very sound and scientifically supported observations, and how can we implement that in the overall pediatric or adolescent health, right, from the clinical perspective, what do you think is necessary to do, and what should be our short-term goals as a goal to really make an impact and not sort of only present these research findings and discuss them at the conferences?
Yeah, I think, you talked about it in the beginning, that sleep really should be considered a pillar of health. We say that, but sleep is sort of undervalued in modern society. It's the first thing to go when we're busy and we have other competing interests, and I think children observe that and sort of adopt it themselves. So I think, I don't know about you, but in school they talk about nutrition and all of these aspects of health, but not really about sleep. So really understanding what is normal duration of sleep for each age is really important, and connecting kids really to the understanding of how this affects their health and their mental well-being. I think a lot of kids, for instance, are involved in physical activities or sports and activities that go until like 9 or 10 o'clock sometimes with games and whatnot. And they really need to start understanding that, improving sleep can improve their performance, can improve things like memory, so that there's some buy-in at their level. I think also, at a larger health scale level, interestingly, we don't really teach about sleep in medical education. And that is a problem, when you're going for your counseling or you're bringing your children to health visits, that sleep might not necessarily be something that's really stressed or even asked about. So the American Academy of Pediatrics is emphasizing things like sleep time, as well as behaviors relating to social and emotional wellness and screen time. And I think that kind of messaging is really important, that it's just getting built into the culture of primary care, and then appropriate referrals can be made when sleep disorders are actually identified.
Thank you, Kiran. I'm going to take on and talk a little bit about the next theme, which is interface of sleep, circadian biology, and neurodegenerative disease. As a neurologist, I think that's what I study on a daily basis. We are really making a great progress in recognizing truly bidirectional relationship between the sleep continuity and quality, circadian timing, and neurodegenerative disease. And I will just give you an example of one disorder which I find a fascinating disease, which we study both clinically and in a research perspective here at Mass General Brigham. That is a condition known as a REM sleep behavior disorder, or RBD. In this condition, individuals have a really vivid dreams, which are very active and action-packed dreams, where people feel threatened and being attacked and are in situations that they need to defend themselves. And they do exactly that. In the middle of the night, they start to yell and trash and kick and throw themselves out of the bed and go undiagnosed for years until really bad injury happens. Well, it turns out that these individuals have a huge risk of developing a neurodegenerative disease. To be very specific, over 90% of patients properly diagnosed with this condition will develop either Parkinson's disease or dementia with Lewy body. So here we have this great opportunity to really understand the progression of a neurodegenerative illness. And not only that, we are in a position now to identify patients who are at risk of developing these incurable neurodegenerative diseases and work on the intervention and therapeutics that can arrest that neurodegeneration in its early stages before the toll is too high on these lost neurons, and probably where we have much better chance to slow and arrest the progression of that neurodegeneration. And I'm really excited to say that we are finally, after studying this disease for over 20 years, at the point where we are starting clinical trials later this year, which will focus on modifying neurodegenerative risk to targeting patients with sleep phenotype, to targeting patients who have REM sleep behavior disorder. And this disorder is not all that uncommon in general population. It probably affects over 1% of individuals above age 40. And if I tell you that that's the same prevalence as bipolar disease, and ask anyone, any audience, how many in the audience know what bipolar disease is versus what REM sleep behavior disease is, the discrepancy would be really astonishing. So a lot of work to do. This is just a small illustration, small example how sleep and circadian biology is also critical in the progression of these neurodegenerative diseases, and how we have wonderful targets now where sleep has become both diagnostic and therapeutic target for these neurodegenerative illnesses. And much more to come from this field of study. Now, I'd like to turn to other fascinating area. When we talk about sleep, we frequently neglect circadian rhythms and circadian biology. And here next to me, we have a really pioneer of circadian science, Dr. Chuck Czeisler. And Dr. Czeisler, I'd like to ask you to comment on the significance of circadian health. And overall, maybe you can summarize, I know that's very challenging, but your life work on significance of circadian homeostasis and these Zeitgeber, such as light interventions for human physiology and behavior.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. It's been astounding to me that it's 40 years since we discovered that light was the primary synchronizer of our human circadian rhythms, and that it is the means by which our internal clock is reset every day. Because there are two things that regulate our ability to sustain wakefulness and sleep at night. One is the fact that we get more tired as the day wears on, and then we build up what Alex referred to as homeostatic sleep drive. And the second is that we have this internal clock that sends out the strongest drive for wakefulness near the end of the day, in the evening, to help sustain us, and again, as the homeostatic drive is increasing. And then we release the sleep-promoting hormone melatonin, which allows us to go to sleep. But when we're exposed to light, even we did a study a number of years ago showing that even the light from a light-emitting e-book, which is what we call the iPad in our publication, will actually shift our circadian rhythms to a later hour, make it more difficult for us to fall asleep, and more difficult for us to wake up in the morning. And that led Apple eventually to create a software called the Night Shift, which allows you to remove a lot of the blue enriched light from your devices. And Michael Herf to develop similar software for non-Apple products. But there's recent evidence that misalignment of circadian rhythms related to too much exposure to light at night or not enough exposure to light during the daytime actually affects many areas of health profoundly. And we got a hint of this when we were doing a study, and we found out that the impact of the reported impact of insufficient sleep on increasing the risk of metabolic diseases was, our studies indicated that could be mitigated just by keeping people in the dark, even if they didn't get more sleep, which is kind of crazy because, so what you're doing is shielding people from being exposed to light at night, which is, in terms of the photic exposome, it's a toxic period to be exposed to light. But a study of the 88,000 people in the UK Biobank followed over an 8-year interval finds that the group that gets the most exposure to light at night has a 25 to 30% increased risk of death over the 8-year interval, similar in magnitude to the group that gets an insufficient amount of light during the daytime. And that is driven primarily by increased risk of cardiovascular death. So now we're connecting the circadian system, which regulates so many physiologic functions, with major health outcomes, and yet, as Alex said, your doctor's not talking to you about this, And people are completely unaware of how dangerous it is to be exposed to light at night.
Really, I think we are, based on everything that you other colleagues in the country and worldwide have done for circadian, understanding circadian biology, we are really truly at the prime time for circadian medicine.
Right.
And we really look forward to implementing these principles in the routine clinical practices as well. Because this is a relatively low-hanging fruit with a substantial potential to improve both human behavior and human health at large.
Yeah. I agree.
Right. Terrific. Well, time goes by very quickly when you are having fun, so we have only a few minutes left. And so towards the end of this panel, I'd like to ask all of our panelists, where do we go from here? What do you think are biggest innovations that are ahead of us when it comes to the field of sleep and circadian medicine? And there is a lot of optimism, right? But what do we think will be happening in the next 5 to 10 years? Andrew, let me start from that side of the table.
Yes, I'd love to. So not only will the treatment for sleep apnea change, or at least more treatments will be available beyond just mechanical therapies like CPAP, but I'm sure you can all imagine that the way that we measure sleep and monitor sleep is going to change. It's already starting to change. So right now, if you come to your doctor and you complain of daytime sleepiness, maybe you snore, and the doctor wants to get a sleep study, you have to wait 6 months. You do a sleep study you can do a single night of study, and the doctor looks at it, tells you whether or not you have sleep apnea and whether or not you're stuck wearing a mask for a long time. That's going to change. There will be devices that you can, maybe your doctor might have to prescribe it, but it will be yours. You can use it over many nights. It will diagnose not only whether or not you have sleep apnea, but the different types of sleep apnea that we really didn't go into. We mentioned one with central sleep apnea, but and what happens is, I don't know, maybe this is how it happened in the past, but once you have more treatments available, eventually you begin to start looking at different phenotypes or different types of the sleep apnea that you have. And so we will use these home wearable devices to do multi-night sleep studies, to then use experimental therapies that hopefully people will invest in, that will not just the treatments, but the technologies to monitor your sleep. People are obsessed. I mean, they come into the clinic with their devices, and they, like Kieran will probably tell you, they haven't been validated. We don't really know how good they work, but again, we're getting sort of pushed forward in this with our own patients. So the future of sleep will be, more close monitoring, more careful diagnosis of the underlying problem, in particular sleep apnea, as well as more therapeutic options available. And then monitoring you after you give those therapies.
Larry, what do you think?
As often is the case, I'm in violent agreement with Andrew. I think the monitoring is particularly important. Right now, some of you may have had home sleep tests for sleep apnea. They're somewhat they're at least annoying, if not painful. You have to get wired up heavily, and you sort of sleep and sort of don't. That's changing literally within months to a few years. They're under mattress devices now. They're starting to enter the US. They're RFID devices. We at Apnimed, even though we're a therapeutics company, have developed a ring that we believe, and of course tested at Andrew's laboratory, outperforms any of the other rings that you can buy in terms of diagnosing sleep apnea or, frankly, other, I didn't bring one with me, too bad, other sleep-related disorders. So that's going to be a dramatic change. And because I think because we're at this conference, we're required to mention AI, so somebody has to, but more seriously, you will see these devices, and we're in the process of doing so, connected to AI that's going to give you much more information about your sleep than you have now, or that maybe even than you want. But I think that's probably inevitable. So the technology is changing very, very quickly.
Kieran, your thoughts?
Yeah, just to build on what Andrew was saying, I think in pediatric medicine, monitoring is really important, and oftentimes parents aren't co-sleeping, adolescents' doors are closed, we have really no idea what happens in the bedroom. So I think that monitoring is important. Things that detect light is actually important, to your point. It's not uncommon that we see that there's blue light in the bedroom that shouldn't be there, and that's why there's insufficient sleep. So that type of information is really important. And then just to build off the monitoring further, right now we use something called actigraphy, which is kind of a wristwatch device that measures motion. But it's really not been validated well for sleep disorders, surprisingly. So if someone's just lying there and can't sleep, they'll say it's wake. And if someone is a restless child and sleeping, they'll say that they were awake all night when they were actually asleep. So that needs to be refined. And then with that information, once it's validated, it really is an opportunity to develop more personalized medicine, which is important. And then I think because the sleep education is lagging in medical schools and in primary care offices, working with the EHR to develop prompts on, asking about sleep if it wasn't documented, providing some counseling to the patients maybe in real time after summary visits can be really helpful just to get the health education component out there. And then the last thing I'll say is there's, a lot of drug development in wake-promoting medications. So there's new compounds called orexin agonists. These are things that are very useful for maintaining wakefulness. I worry if we start developing those types of treatments, do we undervalue sleep? It's okay to get only 4 or 5 hours of sleep as long as you're not sleepy and performing well and cognitively well. And I think we just need more research to really show that there's something important about the sleep itself, not just how we feel after it.
Terrific, thank you. Chuck, closing thoughts?
I think that personalization of the information from patients and from just the general public is going to be very important. We've just done a validation study comparing the Apple Watch, Fitbit, and the Oura Ring, and they each have strengths, but they're compared very favorably to polysomnography. And I think that once we start getting feedback and incorporating circadian models of light regulation, then we'll really be able to give advice to people that is going to be much more actionable than what they're getting now. And I think that that's going to be really important for patients and for sleep health education. And by the way, a plug for we have a website, understandingsleep.org, which will direct you to the Harvard Medical School Sleep Health Education Program. And which provides information about sleep health, about what happens when you don't get enough sleep, and we have modules on sleep apnea that feature Shaq and some funny videos and things like that, so I think you'd enjoy that. Understandingsleep.org.
Terrific, thank you. I would say in the field of neurology and neurodegenerative illnesses, I'm certain that we will position sleep as a therapeutic target which will help us to slow the progression of these neurodegenerative diseases. I predict that by monitoring sleep and wake physiology, we will be able to predict who are the patients who are at risk of developing these neurodegenerative diseases. And I predict that we will have a very robust engagement with our industry partners as we target our patients who are sleep patients and yet at risk for developing these neurodegenerative diseases in order to maximize earliest possible interventions before these ominous neurodegenerative processes take us to the place of no return where we are currently with all of these neurodegenerative incurable diseases. So in closing of this panel, I would really like to thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found this dialogue. It wasn't really a dialogue, it was our monologue. We sort of apologize for that, but we're happy to answer any questions after this. We hope that you found these presentations useful and thought-provoking. We are open for interaction and conversations. We are all relatively easy to track down. Please do so. We'd like to engage with all of you. And as a moderator, I'm truly indebted to this team of world experts that really made this panel so outstanding. So we wish you all great remaining time at this conference and are very appreciative of the organizers for including sleep at World Innovation Forum 2025. Thank you very much.